Welcome back to the Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Raymond Wu. In this segment, we will continue our discussion with Dr. David Huang of the academic Sinica. We're going to be discussing U.S.-China policy and also U.S.-Taiwan relations in general. David, I'm going to ask you, we know that U.S. currently, the new Secretary of State, Mrs. Hillary Clinton, just visited Asia. This is her first official trip since taking over the office. Why is it that she picked Asia first, including some very important allies of the U.S., like Japan, China, South Korea, Indonesia, and instead of going to Europe, which is traditionally being very important to the U.S.? How would you assess that, preference?
Well, commentators always argue that this is a signal that the U.S. foreign policy changed from transatlanticalism to the trans-Pacificalism.
Yes.
But in fact, that, as I said before, that the Europe also received the current Vice President Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. So this Obama administration is very, very good at balancing different perspectives.
Yes.
And I think the Asia's rise is undoubtedly is a fact. So United States recognize the importance of Asia, especially in terms of trading partners, in terms of security interest in the East Asia. So naturally, Mrs. Clinton picked up her first trip to East Asia to show that the United States really care about the East Asia, which always been argued as being neglected by the previous Bush administration. At the same time, also would like to restore the U.S. image in East Asia. And we are in the policy community circles, and people always, especially in East Asia, feel that the U.S. sometimes neglect the East Asia, especially Southeast Asia. For example, the ASEAN and in APEC, sometimes the U.S. simply Secretary of State never attend that. So this trip simply symbolized that the rise of Asia, and also try to reassure the alliance. That's why Mrs. Clinton picked up the Japan as her first visit.
Yes.
But during that visit, she also invited the Prime Minister Aso to visit, to be the first foreign visitors to Washington, D.C. in the White House. So this is the symbol of the alliance. And of course, that the commentators said that when Mrs. Clinton running for the presidency, she wrote an article in the Foreign Affairs, I don't know, somehow neglect Japan. So this is one way to make up for that.
Yeah.
But most importantly, she want to show that in fact the China is very, very important.
Yeah.
Before she visit China, I think she delivered a speech in the Asia Society in New York. She said that she would like to develop a comprehensive partnerships with China. And that shows how important the China in U.S. interest. And of course, at this moment, economic downturn in the United States, China promised to buy more U.S. government bonds and treasury bonds. And that is a very, very important support for the U.S. current policy, especially $78 billion US stimulus package.
Yes.
Is borrowing money from elsewhere.
Yes.
So China's support has become very, very important. So in general, it's simple. The Mrs. Clinton's visit to the East Asia symbolized that the U.S. really start to look at treat Asia as an important partner, rather than simply just always look west to count on the European countries.
Yes. Of the 4 Asian countries that Mrs. Clinton visited, of course, Japan, Indonesia, Korea, and China. Those of us in Taiwan, of course, will be most interested in U.S.-China relations, and also in Mrs. Clinton's first visit to Beijing. And I think most of the analysts before the meeting, before the visit, predicted that there wasn't going to be much on cross-strait relations. And as it turned out, most of the analysts were right in terms of this is a first visit. by the new U.S. Secretary of State, and she's coming into a very fairly new territory for her, and she wants to make a good impression, and also rumored that she wants to reassume the control of the tempo, the progress, the development of U.S.-China relations away from the Department of Treasury, as it was under President Bush. So all these factors indicated that she wanted to be a very stable, a very safe visit to Beijing, and it turned out to be that way. However, later on, it was just like a few days after the delegation returned to Washington, D.C., Christopher Hill, who was there with her, in a briefing with the press, did mention the fact that during the conversation between Mrs. Clinton and top Chinese leaders, the issue of Taiwan's international space did come up. And U.S. policy has traditionally been they support the quote-unquote meaningful participation of Taiwan in international organizations. Were you surprised by the fact that Mrs. Clinton brought this up in her first visit and first meetings with the top Chinese leaders?
I'm not surprised. Why? Because I think during that meeting, there are a lot of issues about Taiwan, especially I can presume that China will always mention arms sale to Taiwan,
yes.
U.S. arms sale to Taiwan, that will inhibit the U.S.-China relations. So in the same time, Mrs. Clinton probably used Taiwan's participation in international organization as a way to counterbalance this argument. We don't have any debriefings from the U.S. government. I don't know whether we do have or not, but when I served in the tech role in Washington, D.C., we always ask the U.S. State Department to debriefing of all the meetings between the United States and China. So I think tech role will handle this well as usual. So before we have some inside story, I think I'm not surprised. Why? Because U.S. traditional policies support Taiwan's participation in international organizations. In 1994, the policy reviews under the Clinton administrations, it's very clear the U.S. lay out saying that U.S. support Taiwan's participation in international organization where statehood is not prerequisite. When statehood is prerequisite as a condition for Taiwan to participate in the international organizations, U.S. does not support but promise Taiwan's voice to be heard. So this is the general policies. So when Mrs. Clinton brought out this kind of the request between her meeting with the Chinese leader, I think is quite reasonable. But of course, that we don't know the details about the conversation. So we have no idea why, under what context. But I think U.S. at this moment probably will be more comfortable to bring out these issues as close relations become
more relaxed
and less tensions. And U.S. bring out this issue is a safe issue. It will hurt nobody. Of course, U.S. can also claim credit if Taiwan actually participate in the coming WHA as an observer,
yes.
or meaningful participate in WHO activities. U.S. can claim credit, but I think this is all the beautiful rhetorics during the visit. But we have to be careful in the future whether any substantial issue will come up and prepare it well in advance, rather than simply just react to the developments.
Yeah. Well, David, let's shift the focus a little bit, from Washington, D.C. back to Taipei. And you were at one time the vice chairman of Mainland Affairs Council. You're also the former deputy representative to Washington, D.C. So you've had experiences in government on cross-strait policy making as well as U.S.-Taiwan relations. How would you assess the current government's policy towards the United States, being that U.S.-Taiwan relations is probably the most important one for our foreign relations?
Well, I cannot speak on behalf of the current government, of course.
But as an analyst,
as
a scholar.
Yes. So maybe my view is my bias, probably. But on the other hand, I think as I observed from the government official lines, the current government simply the first objective of the current government is to restore trust between the U.S. government and Taiwanese government. The second objective is to seal the security ties between the U.S. government, United States and Taiwan. And the third is try to promote some sort of equal distance between the U.S.
and China.
Taiwan and China.
Okay.
And this is the broader outline. Now, restore trust. Of course, current government believe that the trust between United States and Taiwan has been deteriorated because of the previous governments promote certain policy items.
Yes.
So the urgent things for this government is to restore trust. Well, I believe that there's some sort of misunderstanding of the current situation, especially during the later stage, where I serve as the deputy representative of TECRO in Washington, D.C. The misunderstanding is such that the trust is no longer issues.
Okay.
The problem here is that when U.S. promote U.S. national interest, try to persuade Taiwan not to do certain things. The Taiwan side.
Sometimes there is a conflict.
There's a conflict of interest.
Okay. Hold that thought a second, David, because we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back to Taiwan Outlook. We'll continue the conversation with Dr. David Huang. We'll be right back.